Well, hello everybody. How's everything going? So wonderful to have you here. My name is Anna Sabramowicz, and this is part 2 of a 3-part series on how to design better scenario questions. Now, this particular episode will get into tips 4, 5, and 6, which are basically tips that I've gathered over the past decade plus. I'm not going to tell you how long it's been, don't want to date myself. But basically what I've been doing is crafting scenarios and role plays for a very long time initially as a trainer. And then what happened is I transitioned into e-learning and developed interactive stories. And interactive stories are a little bit different than traditional questions because what they do is they focus on action. They focus on what are you supposed to do next in this particular situation. So they're very excellent to teach people situational things, processes. That's what interactive stories are for. And these scenarios are skewed towards that perspective. That doesn't mean that these tips are not going to be helpful for you if you're crafting any kinds of multiple choice questions. Because they are the best practices that I've picked up and also learned from my students as they're developing their own pieces. Now, anything that I mention in this particular experience as far as a resource, I will be putting in the description below and also sharing with you a couple of interactive stories that are fantastic that came from our community that I think you should check out because they will help you contextualize a lot of the tips that I'm giving you here, right? You want to see what's possible so you can model it and design your own. All right, so first off, now, let's talk about tip number 4. Da, 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 da. All options are lessons. And this goes like totally against the grain of what you've seen in academic development, right? Because you'll see options like none of the above. That's not a lesson. A, B, and C. B and C are true. We are not doing anything like that. And I'm going to show you examples. In an interactive story, and as I dare say, any scenario-based experience, every single choice that you put in to those options, it cannot be a waste because every single one of those choices in a good scenario goes to a consequence. And your consequence is teaching somebody a lesson. So there's a way to think about options and scenarios that is just the best practice. And if you do this, you will never have throwaway options where somebody's like, obviously, pizza and beer tonight is not one of the options that I should be choosing. I can see that's definitely not the right answer. None of those will be like that. Every single one of them will be meaningful. And here's how I want you to think about it. So let's say, not saying you have to follow this framework, but I'm saying that it's good to think about it this way for the future, and then you build on it and deviate as you wish, okay? So let's say all of the A options, or there's always an option in your scenario choices where it represents the assumption the learner makes in the situation. So our job as people who are designing scenarios for people is to tackle the reasons why somebody didn't do the thing they were supposed to do. And maybe a lot of times when somebody's new to this particular situation, they have an assumption about how this is going to work out. And the assumption might be about even the topic, like people are born leaders and I'm not going to be like, leadership is innate and therefore I don't have it, or I can't do it. So they might not choose a specific option because they might believe that, or they might assume that. So that's something that you would pull out from your conversations with your practitioners and subject matter experts, right? And so I want you to say, okay, can I write a detail here or a choice here that will basically represent this assumption in my learner's mind? And for somebody who believes this, they'll actually choose that and see what happens next. And that'll be a great lesson for them because they're like, if they assume that, what's the consequence of making that assumption? So let's say B represents a bias the learner has in the situation. So a bias might be like, one of the experiences might be like a cultural awareness, where let's say you go to a different country and you're trying to negotiate, and one of the things you end up doing, you have a bias for as somebody, let's say, who comes from a culture who is focused on clarity and directness, is that your bias would be to get to the point as soon as possible because you don't want to waste people's time. While maybe in that culture, their bias is for talking and discourse and creating a whole bunch of relationship building first before actually getting to the point that you need something and you need to negotiate on something. So there's a bias there, bias for action or a bias for getting to the point. Well, that's something that you can represent in your options. Say, hey, these options, this particular option, it represents a bias that the learner has. Good, okay. And then let's see, I'm not saying all of these need to go into every single one of your scenarios, but these are just ways that you can use your distractors to actually teach people lessons, and always think about how can I put something meaningful here. So this one represents a fear the learner has about this situation. And it could be something like, let's refer back to broken coworker. A lot of people don't say no or don't push back when somebody's asking them a favor that puts them out of their comfort zone, because they're afraid of looking like they're not going to be a team player, like they're not friendly, like they're not giving, all those things, right? They're not accommodating. So that's their fear. So what would that fear be represented as? So I want you to now think about every single one of your options is going to represent, yes, there's going to be the correct answer, the correct way forward maybe. But then there's also going to be things that you're going to tackle at the same time, because you want to tackle the things that are holding people back from making this decision effectively. So that's going to be assumptions, that's going to be bias, and that's going to be fears. And I'm sure there's others, but for now, this is a great start. I hope that was clear. Let me know in the comments if you're finding this valuable and useful, and if it provokes other questions for you, because I'd love to tackle that. All right, so are you ready for tip number 5? That's right, I got it ready. Okay, it doesn't all need to be poor, better, best. So we kind of get, I think, when we start crafting scenarios, we fall into this heuristic. We're like, okay, there's got to be the good option, the okay option, and the best option. It doesn't always work like that. And I want you to feel like you can stray from that, because that's not life, right? Sometimes life is, all of them are poor, except in this specific context, the option that is best and least painful is this. And there's an example of that in A Broken Coworker as well, where one of the options is, or one of the situations is where Emma comes up to Sam, who is working, and she asks him to open a pickle jar for her. Now, she's being very innocent and kind of tongue-in-cheek. But if Sam has been, let's say, resentful, then what happens is he overreacts with assertiveness, and in some ways actually comes up as being the jerk himself. And so in those situations, the way we crafted that particular scenario choice, most of those choices, the one that usually categorically worked for all the others was actually the wrong option there. It was the wrong thing to choose because it was an overreaction in that specific context. And then the other two didn't actually move the needle at all because we were tracking the data on the back end. So what I want you to consider is that sometimes you can keep the pattern of poor, better, best, but it doesn't always work that way. And if your situation doesn't warrant it, there might be a reason why you're struggling to get poor, better, best, is because sometimes it's poor, better, So make sure that you let that context and the scenario guide that without being too dogmatic about, the structure of the actual options and them being in that particular order, because it could all be just whatever's best for that particular situation. So I hope that helps. And the other thing there that I forgot to mention is that sometimes it's good to interrupt a pattern, because people can fall into patterns. So maybe you can throw them a question where, like I said, just because you've been doing this for so long, that doesn't mean you can apply it as a blanket across all things. You actually have to think about this particular situation and the context and how now is the most appropriate response. So here we go. Number 6. Okay, you should test before you build. This is so cool. So I have a great story from one of my students. What she did is she developed her scenarios, wrote them out, and started building her prototype for the first one. But then what she wanted to do is she wanted to see if if her questions were really like valid, if they were good. So what she did is she printed them out on pieces of paper, kind of like basically a multiple choice test. She got a couple of people who just finished the training that she was going to be augmenting with these scenario questions, and they hadn't seen them before, and they had just finished the course being very, very confident about their abilities. And so she brought them in, and what she did is she actually just gave them the pieces of paper and said, okay, I'll give you the setup. So she'll give them the scenario, and I just want you to circle the option that you think is going to be the best. And at the end, when she finished the test, right, basically just testing these questions and the options with the end user, she was like, "How did it go?" And they were like, "It was easy. This was so easy." And she was like, "Oh my God, I feel like great. I didn't come up with really meaningful scenario choices. They completely thought it was just way too easy." And so she got discouraged there for a little bit, and then she looked at their answers. And they didn't do very well at all. They jumped to assumptions. Now, what's kind of freaked her out was that, oh my gosh, these people just finished training and they think this is easy, and they really didn't do well on how to handle these situations. But then again, the other win was, I know that this is really, really needed, because in context, these people still don't know what to do, and this is going to be a great augmentation to the training that's there. And I was like, that is so solid. That's such a great win. And the thing is that testing was done with paper and pencil, and just her taking the time to, you can do that over Zoom calls, even just send a document to everybody, have them like print it out and be like, okay, what do you think? Or mark a survey, right? As you're going through to get that initial feeling of whether this is actually, whether you're on the right path, and see patterns before you even have to build anything, which is so fantastic. So like I said, test your questions with your end user. You can do it very quickly with paper or over Zoom, ABC. It's very simple, but it also gives you like really, either way, you'll learn something beneficial. And before you build, either it'll just completely reinforce like your, like this project is totally worth it. Look at all the, the research that I've done, the value that I'm going to deliver is going to be so useful. Or, oh my gosh, they all chose this. They did think it was easy, and they actually did spectacularly on it. I better come up with some better, more useful questions for them. So I hope that was that was a great story for you, because it's true, and it inspired me definitely to continue doing testing with end users and how simple it can be, because it's got so much value. If you enjoyed this series and you want to catch up on the next one when it's released, guess what? You better hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, also share it with somebody who you think is going to find it valuable. And if you missed the first video, I will link it in the comments or in the description below to make sure that you don't miss it, because I've got 3 more tips to show you in the next video. I hope you join me. Take care. Bye.